Hello, my name is Yves Lacombe. I am the Senior Technician and Director of Support here at Vercom. We're the people behind Norman Email Protection and the alter ego product called Modusgate. And we're basically going to show you how to move a NEP server from 2003 to 2012. If I make a mistake of saying Modusgate, please use them interchangeably. They're pretty much the same product. Why do we have these instructions? Well, basically, 2003 is an obsolete operating system. Microsoft isn't even supporting it at all, including any kind of aftermarket patches or anything like that. And it's time to move on. There's security reasons also. SHA-1 and SHA-2 hashing functions, basically. SHA-1 hashing functions are pretty much dead at this point. They're going to be completely phased off the internet by the end of 2016. So by January 1st, 2017, certificates created on 2003 servers or used with 2003 servers will no longer work. So no more HTTPS, and that could harm spam updates, virus updates, people going to your web quarantine login. All that is going to break because SHA-1 will no longer be supported. So it's really time in 2016 for you guys to start moving off of 2003. This being said, we're going to show you how. It's not that complicated. This is more like a normal case scenario where you have a single NEP server running everything locally. It might be a little bit more complicated, more complex setups. So if you have questions, you should contact us, support@vercom.com or eve@vercom.com. That's myself. You could try support first in case I get hit by a bus. I want somebody to be able to answer in my stead. So it's always a good thing to do. So without further ado, here are the migration steps. You have about 10 steps to follow. Get an extract of the registry configuration of NEP on the old server, get the databases, get the quarantine message files, which are different from the databases. Install NEP on the new server. I forgot a step there is it's install SQL Express on the new NEP server first before you do your install of NEP. Turn off the garbage collection on the new NEP server before you copy all the messages over. Import the database and then edit the registry configuration and import it. That's the registry configuration we got off the old server. And the go live is actually pretty short. It's like just the time it takes where you just swap the IP addresses between the old box and the new box. And then finally there's a little file you have to fix and you're done. So let's start with the registry configuration. So first we go on the old NEP server. This is actually a test box, but it's pretty much configured like a live one. It's caught protecting mail from my home domain. And as you can see, there's stuff in the quarantine. I have users and I have a domain here. So it's pretty much a vanilla NEP server with a single domain. Doesn't matter if there's multiple domains or multiple mailboxes, the principle is the same. On my NEP server, I have a separate database for everything. In some cases, you may encounter NEP servers where you only have one database, the default, and it's a little bit easier, you're just copying the default database. But in many cases, everything's going to be separate. So the most important databases you want are the default, the quarantine, and the CivStore. The default is where some of the house chore stuff is stored. The quarantine is where obviously the quarantine index is stored. The physical messages are stored separately. And the CivStore is where the user whitelist and blacklist are stored. So it's very important to get that one. Here's the downtime. The first downtime comes in is you have to stop the services on this box. Well, to get the registry configuration files, you don't need to actually stop the service. So you go to the root folder of where Norman NEP is. Norman email protection. You do mail config backup config.txt. Right, I'll use this so you can delete it. And you do it again. There's our config file. If you open it up with Notepad, it contains a copy of everything setting-wise that's in NEP. So So you would copy this file over to the other server. I already did it. It's in my case, it's under a folder called C transfers here. So this is the config file that I grab off of here. So once you've done that, you have to get a copy of the databases. So you would, this is where the downtime comes in. So you would stop the services. Usually when you bring an app server down, you don't have to worry too much because mail servers on the internet will retry for a while. So it shouldn't be noticeable too much, unless the databases are huge, like in the multi-gigabyte size. But if they're small, then people should not notice the downtime. So you go into, in my case, SQL Express 2005. And you basically detach the needed databases. So I would like take the net default, task detach. You would take the net quarantine, detach, and the net zip store. The audit and the monitoring I don't take because they're statistics. We don't care about those. But let's just copy the most important stuff. So I grab those. And now I would just go under Program Files, Microsoft SQL Server, MS SQL, Data, and I would just grab the default, the quarantine, and the zip store. I would copy them over to the share on the network, where resides the files that I need to build the new box. I already did it on this box, so they're all here right now. And once you've done that, you have to quickly reattach the databases on the NEP server so it can start functioning again here before you switch over to the new box. Attach. So we're going to reattach our databases quickly. So the default first. It's going to ask you about indexing. You can skip that question. So add NEP default. Ooh, I made a mistake, I guess. I attached the wrong one, I'm sure. So let's try again. Let's add. Let's cancel this. So databases. Net default. Let's task detach. Let's reattach. Attach. Add. Net default. One or more full text columns, we don't care. We're going to attach the quarantine, and we reattach the zip store. So as you can see, if I refresh, our databases are back. I can start up the services on Norman Email Protection on the old box. And we're almost done grabbing what we need. So if we go back to our migration, so we've got a copy of our databases, now we need to get a copy of the quarantine messages. So depending on how you prefer, you can use Robocopy, you can use just Windows drag and drop. Personally, I prefer Robocopy. If there's a lot of files, you would Robocopy the Norman Email Protection mailbox at quarantine folder, which is where the quarantine is stored. What I mean by that is you go to C, Program Files, Norman Email Protection, mailbox, at quarantine. This is the folder you need. Now, in your quarantine, your physical quarantine might not be there, so you can go into Direct Registry and check. If you go into the HKey Local Machine Software Vercom VOTMail key, and you search for VSQ, VS Quarantine Destination Path, you have the path right here. Okay. So you would basically take the contents of this entire folder here and start copying it to the new server into a temporary folder somewhere. Or a share on the network. Whatever works for you. You could even FTP it if you want. Okay. So at this point, you've copied everything over. Obviously, new messages might still be coming into the quarantine, but assuming you're doing the go live pretty quickly, it shouldn't matter that much. You could always just release any new FPs that come in the meantime manually. It's not a big deal. So you're done with server, the old server. So at this point, you install NEP on the new server. So before you do that, we're going to talk about SQL. I strongly recommend you install SQL Express 2008 or 2012 with the Management Studio. So when you search for the proper version, just make sure you take the one that has the Management Studio. Okay, so install SQL Express with pretty much the default settings, except you want to have it in mixed mode, so you can have like an SA account and other SQL accounts, right? Once you've done that, you install NEP with the install package. It's a very straightforward install, next install. You just give it the defaults. You would create like I created a temporary database called temp default. I'm sorry, it's going to take just trying to open the console here. There you go. Okay, so if you look here, I have a database called NepTemp. So this is a temporary database. We're going to throw it away once we're done. So it's a very vanilla install. So turn off garbage connection. Okay, here's a very important safety tip. Before you start importing the database and then the quarantine messages, one thing is the quarantine database is kind of just an index of entries that are stored on the hard drive. If you import the database but you don't copy the files first, there's a garbage collection. I would say if an entry is in the database but not on the physical drive, it's going to start flushing the database. So it's important to turn that cleanup function off. And the way you do it is here you would do a regedit. You're going to do under HKLocal machine, WOW 6432 node, software Vercom Botmail. You would create a new dword value called don't do quarantine garbage collection with a value of 1. I know it's a mouthful, but don't do quarantine garbage collection with the value of 1. So that tells NEP not to clean up the quarantine with the garbage collection process. Now that's done, you can start attaching your databases. So basically you would go into the MS SQL data folder and you would copy over the NEP databases you copied over. These little guys here, copy them over here. And you would attach the databases to the SQL server. So I was logged in here, so I'll go attach. What is the NEP default? No catalog. Attach the NEP quarantine. No catalog. And attach the NEP substore. If you're wondering about that full text catalog, you really only use with the audit. So since we didn't transfer over the audit database, that doesn't matter. We're going to create audit databases from scratch in NEP. So now we're actually ready to attach. So if we go back here, install NEP. Just going to try to reduce this here. Install NEP, import the databases and the quarantine messages. So right now we're doing the first part, import the databases. So I'm going to tell NEP to stop using this temporary database. We're just NEP default. We'll need to restart. Quarantine. So NEP quarantine. SA account. No, and the NEP substore. going to create a blank audit database. And we're going to create a blank monitoring database. So now we're ready to stop and start the services on this copy of .NET. Now, as you notice, we haven't copied over the actual physical messages yet. That's the next step we're going to do. So I'm going to go into the root folder where the normally the quarantine is stored. So the program files x86 Norman email protection. We'll go to the mailbox folder. So there's the quarantine folder. So now if I go into the console here, I go to the quarantine, you'll see the quarantine index is there, but the actual physical messages are not visible in the viewing pane of the messages. So that's because we haven't copied the physical files over yet, right? Now the rules are in here, everything else has been imported. We haven't imported the users and domains yet, nor have we imported the connections, because these are stored in the text file. Now, to do the, we're going to do a robocopy. So robocopy from C transfer at quarantine to this to the local at quarantine here. We're already in the destination, near the destination file. /wait1 retry1. Now we're copying over the files. That's why the garbage collection is turned off, because we didn't copy those yet. Now if we go back to the quarantine now, I already had it open. See, now we can see the content of the emails here in the view pane. So we're almost done, actually. So now we need to import the actual configuration files. So now we need to do this little bit here, edit the registry configuration and then import it. So I go into our transfer folder where I put all my migration data here, and we take the config, we make a backup of it first, and we edit the original. Well, as you notice here, in the original configuration, the installation folder was C program files, not C profile, C program files x86. Now, I already installed NEP and it's functioning correctly, so actually I could just remove anything that has a path. So I would just say remove this line here, install directory, the mailbox in dir, the log dir, the spool dir, the destination path for the quarantine, Atom definitions, those are like the virus scanning and the spam scanning definition locations. We're just going to use the defaults we created on the new setup. There's no other path. We also already created our database connection, so anything that talks about a database, DB store URL, the audit DB override and audit DB, quarantine DB override and quarantine DB, monitoring and civ. This should be okay. Now the next step then is, this is the start of the registry hive. We want to find the end. I just take this Control-C, find the end of the hive, and anything else beyond that you can delete, basically. Now your stuff, you have this. Basically, you have the end of the hive of the base registry hive. So you can do File and Save. So we're good to go. We can import this now. So we go back into our root net folder. Norman email protection. Mail config backup dash restore. Now before we do this, we should, as a precaution, stop all the services again. Done. We've done our bit. Now we can do our restore. So mail config backup space dash restore C transfer config.txt. Key restored software work.com. So we imported the config. So now if I go back into the console, I'm not going to get that little route missing error anymore because the routes are there. My users are there. My quarantine, oops, not visible because my services aren't started yet, but the domains are visible. So now I can just start up the services. Takes a little while. Just have to be a little bit patient. We're almost ready at this point to go live, by the way, so and the services are started, so we're pretty much done at this point. So usually it's a good sign if the Modus scan starts. That's it. Roles are here, the users are here, everything's here, we're done. So what's next? The next step then is to make sure the web interfaces work. Now obviously the new box is not on the original IP here, it's on its own IP, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to test the quarantine to make sure it works. Test URL. It works. I'm going to try to log into it. Put in my credentials. Quarantine works, so that's a pretty damn good sign. So at this point, we're done. So all we need to do is set the quarantine report back to use the proper URL. So in this case, it would be the IP of the other server when it goes live. And before we switch over to the other server, to taking the identity of the other server, you have to do one last step here is the 9 fix the webmail SVR INI for the quarantine. So you just go under C, Program Files, Norman, Web, Quarantine, edit the webmail.svr.ini file and change. Normally you'll see the IP address of the box, like 192.82.251.11, but here you just change it to localhost 127.0.0.1. And you change this one here to localhost as well, and save, and stop and start the webmail SVR service here. This one, the quarantine, it's actually quarantine net manager here, so stop start, and you're pretty much done. At this point, all you need to do is change the IP address of the box, of the old box, to say some temporary IP. You change the new box to the IP of the old box. You stop and start the services on this box, and test a little bit more, and you're done. And worst case scenario, you fall back to the old box if ever something screwed up. So it's pretty much done. Have a great day. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or my team at support@vercom.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the process of migrating. Have a great day.